Hello and welcome back into another edition of 8Sports Nightcap here on WRSCNow.com on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Thanks for tuning in. A busy couple of days here across the world of basketball, right? We had the NCAA tournament, and then, of course, we've had a busy time with the coaching carousel as the day after VCU is eliminated, it's announced that he'll be heading to Charlottesville to take over the UVA program. And then we fast forward a couple of days, and yesterday it became official as the Cavaliers introduced Ryan Odom as their 13th head coach in school history as he takes over for Ron Sanchez, who was the interim, and then, of course, for Tony Bennett, who led the Cavaliers to a national championship. And I was in Charlottesville for the introductory press conference, and it kind of became clear as Odom talked more and more about this job that this was kind of a dream job for him, and he kind of landed into a spot that he really wanted to go to, and it kind of took the world by storm. I think a lot of people around college basketball thought this was a good hire, and I think after being there, listening to him talk, I think I agree as well. But I was not the only one, of course. At the announcement, a lot of reporters across the state were there, including Richmond's own Zach Joachim, who I'll bring in now. Zach, how's it going? Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me in what was, a historic day, right, for basketball in the state of Virginia.
Nolan, what's up, my friend? Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to be a part of Nightcap. I love the name, by the way.
Well, thank you. Shannon Sharp, I promise you, he started his show's called Nightcap 2, and we debuted my show, and like a week later, all of a sudden, Shannon Sharp comes out with his name. So I think he stole it from me personally, but I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Should have trademarked it.
Yeah, really. I got the K on mine, though, at least. So, I stand out that much. But what a day in Charlottesville it was. I think to start with you, obviously you cover VCU incredibly closely with the RTD. And when you saw the news that Ryan Odom was heading to Charlottesville, it was kind of writing on the wall, it seems like, to a lot of fans and people close to the program, since maybe as far back as October when it was announced that Tony Bennett was stepping down.
I think Ryan's name came to mind for everyone when Tony Bennett stepped down, right, as a possible candidate for the UVA job. And even dating to a couple years ago when he took the job at VCU, the position for the Rams has obviously been a stepping stone over the years for a lot of coaches who went on to big jobs. Obviously, Mike Rhodes went to Penn State, Will Wade went to LSU, Shaka Smart to Texas. And I think that to a degree for a long time, that was by design for VCU, right? Yep. To look like an attractive place that up-and-coming coaches could come to who wanted to go to a power conference. And perhaps VCU is trying to change that narrative these days. We won't get too much into the conversation on who the next VCU coach will be, but I think that perhaps they're trying to begin a shift away from that. But it served them well over the years, right? And I think that when Mike Rhodes came in, there were a lot of people hoping that he was going to be the guy for a long time, right? And he was there for 6 years. Obviously had deep ties in the Richmond area with his time at Randolph-Macon. But I don't think anyone, when Ryan Odom took the job, thought that, right? That Ryan Odom was going to be there for a long time. Everyone knows that he grew up around ACC basketball, specifically Virginia basketball. Yep. His dad, Dave Odom, was an assistant under Terry Holland at UVA for a long time, and then was the head coach at Wake Forest. So I think everyone knew that in Ryan's heart, that was probably where he wanted to end up eventually. And he talked about that over the last few days, how much Virginia means to him. And you asked the great question that I'm sure we'll see Ryan's response to in a little bit, talking about the fact that Ed McLaughlin, his good friend, dating to their time at American University together, came out and said, we made a competitive offer. And this was not about the money for Ryan Odom, right? This was about going to a university and a program that he grew up around that was near and dear to his heart. We have the photo, I think it was Matt Norlander who mentioned it in the press conference yesterday, the photo of Ryan Odom at 12 years old with a Virginia basketball shirt, which he said had been cycling around for a month or so. That was from 2 years ago that the Odom family provided to us when Ryan took the job at VCU. And so ever since then, everyone has known that Virginia basketball means something special to him. You could hear it in the way he talked yesterday. I led my story with some of those childhood memories that he shared, right? Sitting on Ralph Sampson's knee, going to the Larinagas house and having popcorn and sleepovers. You can just tell that this is not any other job for him. It's a job that, as you said, it felt like perhaps he was destined to end up there, and it was written in the stars, and that was always where he was supposed to be. I think that this was very much an amicable parting between him and Ed McLaughlin. They've been friends, like I said, going back to their time in American. We're seeing Max Scholga there right now who's there to support his coach. He's obviously meant a great deal to him in Max's college basketball career. And I think that even from a VCU perspective, people are sad to see Ryan go, but it was tough in that moment not to feel happy for him.
Absolutely.
That he's ended up at a program that obviously means so much to him.
Yeah, it did kind of turn into a trip down memory lane there for a little bit with Coach Odom during the press conference, talking about going and watching movies, getting popcorn. You mentioned sitting on Samson knees at practice and whatnot. It really became this huge sentimental deal, which I think you can I kind of preached that when I got the job here. Growing up watching stations in Richmond and wanting to come here, but for a coach to like land his dream job at a place where he kind of grew up was a really special moment with his dad in attendance, who's right there, and it was really cool. And I think you brought up some good points about I want to take a step back a little bit. The stepping stone situation at VCU. One thing that I think you've brought this up when I've spoke with you before, it's that he never really talked as if we're going to bring VCU to a national championship. He kind of stayed away from some of that jargon and kind of kept it as what's going on now, and didn't talk about the future much during his time at VCU. Wouldn't you say?
Even in his last few weeks as well, right? He wanted to keep the focus on the task at hand with this team, and I think it was interesting to see the contrast between him and Will Wade, former VCU coach who went to LSU from the Rams and is at McNeese State now, and he's taking the job at NC State. And he was very candid and open about, yes, I've talked to NC State. He said that he told his players, and it's two different approaches. It's two different philosophies, right? I think that there'll be some people who would probably side more with one or the other, but I think a lot of people have respect for how Ryan handled the situation, right? He didn't, obviously, there was talks going on in the background between him and UVA in the last weeks of VCU's season and as they were preparing for the NCAA tournament. But publicly, he always wanted to keep the focus on his Rams team, the task at hand, that they wanted to win games in the NCAA tournament. And he obviously won an A-10 championship. And so I think over his 2 years at VCU, you can only look at it as a successful 2 years. And I think he built a lot of goodwill in the Richmond area in that time. And he's going to carry that with him to Charlottesville again, at a destination that felt like perhaps it was predestined for him to end up there. And so now VCU's in search of a new coach, and that's a topic that is for later in the week. But perhaps they're trying to shift away from that perception as a stepping stone job.
Yeah, I think in terms of leaving a program, I think in the eyes of Ryan Odom, and especially after a couple years go by, it'll be viewed as mission accomplished, right? Come in, take over a program that's just lost a head coach, and rebuild it and win a championship. Hang a banner, and at Siegel Center, and that's what they were able to do. They were able to cut down the nets. I think that was his goal. Obviously, reached the NCAA tournament. I still think they were a team that could have beaten a lot of teams that were in the tournament. I think they got a bad draw against BYU, to be completely honest with you. But I think it was mission accomplished for Ryan Odom in terms of what he was able to do at VCU, and then turn the page to UVA. And you mentioned it's probably been in the works for a little while now. And when we were listening to the press conference yesterday, I think it was kind of evident that this has been something that's been in the works for a while. He talked about how respectful UVA was in their process of trying to hire him, in terms of giving him space and letting him focus on VCU and finish out the season. And then it comes out the day after it was announced that Ryan Odom was going to come to UVA, that Ed McLaughlin had, in his words, put out a competitive counteroffer to try to keep him to stay. And you kind of alluded to this video. This is what head coach Ryan Odom had to say about that counteroffer and taking the job at the University of Virginia.
Opportunity had nothing to do with money. This opportunity here was. This is a place that I grew up. Obviously, you have the ACC. The opportunity to try to compete for a national championship. Is certainly something that excites me. But at the same time, VCU is a special place too, and it's really cool that we have in this close proximity, two great programs. And Ed is going to do his job. Ed and I will always be fast friends, and he's going to find a great coach if he hasn't already. Has he? I know he's working on it. I talked to him, and hopefully that happens. And I'm looking forward to seeing, that materialize. But Ed is one of the best at hiring coaches, in the country, and VCU has always done it. And this was, I was not leaving for other places. This was the place, for me to leave.
Yeah,
but most important.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so there you go. Right, this was the place for him to leave, and I really do believe him when he said that. You were the one in the background that they are working on it, Coach. That was funny. But what were your thoughts on that? I think the thing that kind of stood out to me was the opportunity to win a national championship. Right, I feel like that's something that he can actually really have a try to put his name in the I'm struggling here, echelon of great coaches in college basketball.
He's rocking the orange and navy, isn't he? It does maybe seem like he was always meant to be a Cavalier man, and he obviously grew up around the program. And I completely believe him too, that this wasn't about money. VCU stepped up and made a competitive offer, as Ed McLaughlin said. And maybe I shouldn't say this on the air. I ran into them a month or so ago. Maybe it was a couple months back now, having drinks one night out in the Richmond area. And so Ed and Ryan, that's all legit. They are good friends, going back to their time in American together. And so I'm sure they were communicating through this whole process. And there's a great deal of mutual respect there. And as he alluded to, as Ed alluded to in his statement when he said we look forward to competing against his UVA teams in the coming years, I wanted to ask this question specifically the other day and never got the opportunity. And obviously what was a tight media scrum there,
really.
But about the home and home, which is written into VCU coaches' contracts, right? That if you leave for another Division I program before your contract is up, you have to play a home and home with VCU. I don't think that UVA is going to buy that out. It sounds like by all indications with the relationship that Ed and Ryan have, they're going to play those games. And I remember Kyle Guy coming to the Siegel Center and absolutely killing VCU. I think, what was that, 2013 or 2014? Yeah. And they've played 4 times in recent memory. I have a bunch of friends who went to UVA. My UVA friends have a bunch of friends that went to VCU. Anyone who knows the college complexion in the state of Virginia knows that it's good for college basketball in the Commonwealth when those two programs play, right? And so I think that in the next few years, hopefully they'll play that home and home, and it'll be awesome when Ryan Odom comes back to the Siegel Center and when VCU gets to go up to JPJ, because it is right now the state's 2 preeminent college basketball programs, right? Virginia Tech fans, don't get mad at me, but given success of recent years, I think that's fair to say. Obviously, UVA has a national championship. VCU was in the NCAA tournament this year, and that makes all the sense in the world for a UVA program that's in the ACC, however down the ACC was this year, but that has won a national championship in recent memory, and all the success that Coach Bennett had there. It's big shoes that Ryan Odom is filling, with Ron Sanchez having been the interim for a year, but it still feels like he's kind of the next guy after Bennett, and that he's the one who has to follow in the wake of all the success that Coach Bennett had. But he obviously has a lot of admiration and respect for the culture that he established at UVA. But my friend Mike Barber asked about this, and I thought this was a great point during the press conference. It's not going to be the basketball that UVA has been used to over the years, right? Now Ryan Odom has good defensive teams, don't get me wrong, but this ain't the pack line. This ain't slow down the tempo, and play games in the 50s and 60s. I think UVA fans can be excited about that, right? That Ryan Odom's teams do play a very aesthetically pleasing brand of offensive basketball, and that ball is going to be popping around the perimeter. They're going to be shooting a lot of threes. It was interesting to see all the UVA players there the other day too, because I think that there's going to be a lot of roster overhaul for them, right? Ryan's obviously going to take some players from VCU. Mm-hmm. Brandon Jennings has entered the portal. Luke Bamboye has entered the portal. Michael Bell and Martin Carrere are the 4 VCU players that have jumped in so far. I'd certainly expect a few of those guys to follow Odom to Charlottesville. It remains to be seen who will. And there'll be a good deal of turnover in that UVA roster. Odom and Carla Williams talked about this too. He's really good at using the portal. He understands the modern game and the college landscape and how it's evolved. And so I expect maybe it'll take a year or two, but he's going to build a team there that really reflects his brand of basketball. And, from the VCU community to the UVA community, I think that Cavaliers fans will enjoy watching it as much as Rams fans have.
Yeah, UVA's already feeling, the transfer portal effects as well. Jacob Coffey earlier today announced that he'll be entering the portal from UVA. It was kind of interesting to hear Coach Odom talk about how they ran a workout yesterday before the press conference so that their players could kind of get a feel for, what it was like, maybe with his new staff, which of course includes Griff Aldrich from Longwood, who that was announced over the weekend that he'll be joining his former college teammate or something along those lines. Hampton City ties together and work together at UMBC as well. But what's interesting, I think you brought up Carla Williams, and she kept bringing up the fact that how much legacy, right, is at UVA basketball. Anyone that follows the sport in the state of Virginia knows that legacy well, especially obviously what Tony Bennett was able to build, but even before Tony Bennett. And she talked about how much they're entrusting into Ryan Odom and how the biggest thing that she wanted to bring up when she spoke with the media and to the fans yesterday was that they trust Ryan Odom to hold UVA to the standard that Tony Bennett built. And after watching, I've only obviously been here since last May, but just in the short time that I got to cover Ryan Odom at VCU, it was evident that I think he'll step into those shoes no matter how big they are and be able to live up to the expectations of, I'm not going to say win a national championship right away, but to deliver UVA athletics to, the standard that Tony Bennett held them at. I think that it's a perfect fit. And he talked about, being a puzzler and figuring out ways to change, pieces out and put pieces in. And being a coach is being a puzzler. And if you want to use the cliche, I think he's a perfect fit for what UVA was looking for.
He used that line of being a puzzler a little bit, I think, early in his VCU tenure when he was putting together his first roster with the Rams. And I love the reference to his wife, Lucia. I think he said, "My wife loves puzzles." and you kind of use that as a segue into him putting the UVA roster together. I think for Carla Williams, too, this was her first hire as a men's basketball head coach, right? Ron Sanchez was obviously Tony Bennett's guy that he wanted to get a chance as the interim. And so it's Carla Williams putting a great deal of trust in Ryan Odom. What stood out to me, too, what she said was about his character a little bit, too, and about him being a Virginia guy in her eyes. I think he fits with the culture of UVA athletics. He fits with the culture of the program. And even in his early days at VCU, I think this wasn't a criticism, but you heard more as a compliment. You heard some people, in the background saying, he kind of seems like a UVA guy. He obviously spent time in his childhood around that program. Yeah. And carries himself in a way that to me feels synonymous with UVA athletics and with Virginia basketball. He's kind of similar to Tony Bennett in that way, right? They obviously run very different stylistic teams, but I think in press conferences, in terms of their public persona, they seem like similar guys, right? Just in terms of the accountability, the character, the respect. And for the UVA athletics fan base, that means a lot for you to kind of fit into that idea of I don't want to say Virginia gentleman, but I think that's kind of what Carla is getting at there a little bit, right? That
everything that Tony Bennett was, right?
Exactly. That fit that bill. And when Tony Bennett stepped down and we did the stories on it, we had a lot of UVA fans reaching out, talking about that, about how much they admired his character, about how much they admired him as a human being and how he carried himself away from the basketball court. And so I think as much as X's and O's and winning on the court, that was a big part of this hire for Carla Williams and for UVA, that they wanted to bring in a guy that they felt like reflected them culturally.
We talked earlier a little bit about, during that soundbite, he talked about the opportunity to win a national championship. And, after, reading some of the quotes from, Will Wade, right, at NC State, his quotes about, trying to take NC State to a national championship, it's so, kind of bizarre, and the similarities of, two former VCU coaches now in the ACC, both, speaking to the ACC's ability to compete at the national level. And I the hires are kind of similar in that, they're two coaches that I think are looking for, a long-term spot with the ability to compete on a national stage. And it'll be interesting to see the future of ACC basketball, especially after the season we had this past year with really just Duke succeeding at a national level.
Two coaches with a very similar remit in terms of reestablishing those programs as powerhouses that help raise the profile of the ACC. Two coaches who carry themselves on opposite poles of the spectrum, which is fascinating.
Yeah, right.
I was a student journalist when Will Wade was at VCU. I've obviously followed his career, and we could talk about Will's career for a long time, and have covered Ryan these past 2 years. in terms of press conferences and how they carry themselves, two very, very different coaching personalities, right? But they do step into ACC schools with a very similar level of expectation. I think with where they want to compete, NC State obviously wants to be on par with Duke and North Carolina in that triangle, and to be a school that can compete with blue bloods like that. And UVA wants to get back to where it was under Tony Bennett, right? A perennial top seed in the NCAA tournament, contender atop the ACC, and a program that can compete for national championships. And so it'll be fascinating in these next few years to see how two former VCU coaches alter the landscape of the ACC. Another testament, to the stepping stone perception that the head coaching position at VCU has gained over the years. If you're going to be a stepping stone, be a really good one. And VCU has been a really good one and has been very successful and attractive to the next up and coming coaches in the country because of what it's been able to turn out in terms of moving its coaches on to the power conferences and having success there.
Yeah, no doubt attractive in terms of stepping stones and the same aspect of what is kind of the expectation for the type of NIL money that VCU might have compared to other A-10 teams and other mid-majors for that matter from the numbers that have been thrown out there. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds of a coaching hire because obviously by the time that this airs in the next hour, we could have something else going on. But what is fact is that, you mentioned it earlier, 4 VCU players already in the portal. By my math, there's only 4 current players on the roster left that haven't left the portal. Whoever comes in, whoever that is, it's a big first step is to try to put together a roster because not only is the portal affecting VCU, but they did such a good job last year bringing in talent and keeping talent that majority of production last year for the Rams was, of course, seniors, graduate seniors, fifth-year seniors. And so now they have a huge role job here of trying to fill that production for whatever coach comes in any situation. Having just 4 guys on scholarship, showing up to your first workout's going to be a tough sight for whoever comes in.
I would note that when you enter the portal, it doesn't necessarily mean you're leaving where you're at, right? It means you're evaluating your options. And so I don't think it's a surefire thing that those VCU players who've entered the portal will leave. It's tough for those kids right now when they don't know who their coach is. Right? I mean, they're wondering as much, probably more than any of us, who the next VCU coach is going to be because they want to be able to make decisions about their future. Yeah. And so those kids right now, VCU has to move fast. And Ed McLaughlin has always been, as Ryan said, right, one of the best ADs in the country at moving fast and knowing who his next head coaching hire is. And with the portal these days, with it opening on Monday and all the kids entering it right now, you need to have an answer as fast as possible or you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Right, in terms of creating a roster for next year. But one thing is certain is that this VCU roster is going to look a ton different next year than it did this year. As you alluded to, Jack Clark, Phillip Russell, Zeb Jackson, Max Scholga. This team was built around a core of graduate players. And Joe Bamasil, obviously a Chesterfield native, that are moving on in their careers right now. Max Scholga, it was awesome to see him at Coach Odom's press conference.
It really was.
The other day, he's obviously not going to go play at UVA. That's a testament to the relationship that they've built over their years at Utah State and at VCU together, and how much Ryan's players care about him. I think that genuinely he kind of has always had a very cool, calm, and collected persona, whether that be on the sidelines and in press conferences. And my impression is that he's always been very good at identifying what his players need motivationally. We've seen him lay into them and get intense in moments when he feels like they need that, but that's kind of few and far between with Coach Odom, right? Largely, he's a very, like I said, calm guy on the sidelines who can read what his players need in those moments. And he obviously built a strong relationship with all those guys. And he talked about that in the press conference yesterday, how difficult that conversation is to sit your roster down and tell them that you're leaving, that he had with them the other day. So we'll see what the future holds for UVA. I'm sure a couple of those guys who are in the portal that Odom recruited, specifically Bell and Bamboye, I think that have the closest ties to him are likely to follow him. I know a lot of people are hoping that Brandon Jennings will stay. St. Christopher's alum, was the All-Metro Player of the Year in 2024. Obviously, a lot of local ties for him. His mom is a VCU graduate, has become a cornerstone of the VCU fan base and community. A lot of people hoping that he'll hang around, but VCU needs to, figure out who its next coach is to get that answer to those players so that they can evaluate their future and see what that future could look like at VCU. Fats Billups and Christian Furman as well. The future is up in the air for them. Furman was a team captain this last year, has a really gravitational persona. I know a lot of people love him, and Fat's obviously a local kid who came from Bryna that people really want to see succeed in the VCU uniform. So I think you'll have a few pieces from this team left over for next year. Both those guys that I just mentioned already stayed. They were recruited by Mike Rhodes, right? And they stayed through the transition from Rhodes to Odom. And so I don't think it's out of the question that they hang around and they're still part of this program. But with all the graduate players leaving, with some transfers surely following Odom, it's going to be a very different looking VCU team next year. But whoever the new coach is also going to be able to play the portal and bring in some players. So who knows? The Siegel Center is going to look a lot different next year.
Yep.
But I know that Ed McLaughlin and VCU are working fast in the background right now.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add about that is, you think of Bamboye's play this past year, how much value Brandon James was able to add to this team. They are ACC talent in my mind, that they would be able to compete at that UVA level, which I think says a lot about this past year's team, that, guys that were coming 8th and 9th off the bench at sometimes, 7th off the bench, I think are ACC caliber players. So it wouldn't, shock me that much if Ryan Odom does decide to bring them in. But nonetheless, a crazy week to go from, the heartbreak of the NCAA tournament to, the heartbreak and maybe the writing on the wall that you're going to lose your coach, and then you do, and then all of a sudden you see all your favorite players' names into the portal. I know it's a wide range of emotions, so I appreciate you joining me, Zach, and sitting down to talk some VCU basketball. Where can our viewers find your work?
Richmond.com, man. Or my Twitter is at Zach Joachim, or go to richmond.com. And search my name and look up all the VCU coverage. I appreciate you plugging that. And BYU's a really good basketball team, by the way, worth it to throw out there. Last 4 minutes of the first half, first 4 minutes of the second half were tough for the Rams. That's where BYU separated. But for the rest of it, that was a really close game. Cougars went on to beat Wisconsin, and now they're in the Sweet 16. Exactly. So I know a lot of people in Richmond will be watching them, see if they can make a deep run in March here.
Yeah, a couple of times I've wondered if who was it? Joe Bamisile, if he hits that open three when they were going for the 2-for-1 going into halftime, if that would have changed the game. I feel like it would have. But nonetheless, how's your bracket doing before I let you go?
I filled out 5 different ones.
Oh, that's cheating. Come on.
It depends which one you ask about. A couple of them are doing well. A couple of them that I really stressed the success of the SEC over the course of the season, which I wrote about in kind of our bracket primer. For people that ran right before the NCAA tournament started, obviously getting 14 teams in, I think it was a safe bet to bet on them being successful in the NCAA tournament, and that's come to fruition this year. I did fill out one that had VCU in the Final Four, because I always
you do have
that
to,
every
right?
year that they make it. You have to, exactly, so that if they do make it, you can say you called it. So that one's not doing great. I also had one that had St. John's winning a national championship.
There you go.
I love that St. John's team. That one's not doing so hot either.
Well, there you go. Hey, March Madness. We got a couple more weekends left of basketball, so thanks so much. Be sure to follow Zach for more VCU news. You can never have enough. I know all these Rams fans try to get as much as they can, so be sure to follow him along as well. Zach, thanks so much. We'll catch you next time. Perfect. Well, I just want to thank Zach so much for stopping by to talk a little VCU hoops. That's going to wrap things up here for another edition of 8Sports Nightcap. Be sure to tune in tonight at 11 o'clock as we bring you a little bit more from Longwood's edition of their new head coach and, of course, their departure of Griff Aldridge, who joined Ryan Odom at VCU. A lot of busy time to talk, and, of course, in the next couple of days, VCU might have a new head coach, and, of course, we'll have full coverage of that whenever that happens, which should probably happen within the next week as we talked earlier about all that transfer portal stuff. But anyway, we'll see you tonight at 11 o'clock, guys. Have a good one. Goodbye.